In the quiet, dusty town of Wittenberg, a storm was brewing. It was a storm that would shake the very foundations of the Christian world. A storm that began with a single man, Martin Luther. Imagine a world where the church was more powerful than any king, where what the church said went, and where questioning its authority could mean your life. This was the world Luther lived in, a world that he would soon turn upside down. Luther was a strange man, even by the standards of his time. He was born in 1483 to a family of peasants turned miners. His father, Hans, was a stern, unforgiving man who believed that children were born wicked and needed to be beaten into submission. Martin was the eldest of 7, and he faced a childhood filled with fear and violence. His mother, though less harsh, shared her husband's beliefs and often punished young Martin for the slightest infractions. One day, Martin stole a nut, and his mother beat him so severely that he was left with physical and emotional scars that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Despite this brutal upbringing, Martin was a bright and curious child. He excelled in his studies and was sent to study law, but a defining moment changed his path. One day, while walking through a thunderstorm, Martin was struck by lightning. Terrified, he cried out to St. Anne, the patron saint of miners, and vowed to become a monk if he survived. Miraculously, he did, and true to his word, Martin entered a monastery, turning his back on the world and dedicating his life to God. In the monastery, Luther found a new kind of torture. The strict discipline and constant self-flagellation were meant to purify the soul, but for Luther, they only deepened his inner turmoil. He was haunted by a sense of unworthiness and the fear of eternal damnation. His fellow monks saw him as a model of piety, but inside, Luther was a man on the brink of a nervous breakdown. He spent countless hours in prayer, confessing his sins and seeking the mercy of God, but the more he sought it, the more it seemed to elude him. Luther's intellectual journey began when he was appointed as a professor at the University of Wittenberg. Here, he immersed himself in the study of the Bible and the works of the early church fathers. He began to realize that the church's teachings and practices were not always in line with the scriptures. The more he studied, the more he became convinced that the church had strayed far from its original mission. One of the most significant issues that troubled Luther was the practice of selling indulgences. Indulgences were essentially a way for the church to collect money in exchange for the forgiveness of sins. This practice was widespread and had become a major source of revenue for the church. Tetzel, a Dominican friar, was one of the most notorious sellers of indulgences. He traveled from town to town, promising people that by buying indulgences, they could save themselves and their loved ones from the fires of hell. Tetzel's sales pitch was simple and effective. As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs. Luther was appalled by this. He believed that salvation came through faith alone, not through the purchase of indulgences. In 1517, he decided to take a stand. He wrote a document known as the 95 Theses, which challenged the church's practices and called for a return to the true teachings of the Bible. On October 31, 1517, he nailed this document to the door of the Wittenberg Castle Church, an act that would ignite the Protestant Reformation. The church's reaction was swift and severe. Luther was summoned to appear before the Diet of Worms, a meeting of the Holy Roman Empire, to answer for his actions. Despite the threat of excommunication and even death, Luther stood firm. When asked to recant his teachings, he famously replied, "Unless the first am convinced by the testimony of the Holy Scriptures or by clear reason, I cannot and will not recant, for it is neither safe nor right to go against conscience. Here the first stand, I can do no other. God help me. Amen." Luther's refusal to back down marked a turning point in history. His bold stand inspired others to question the authority of the church and to seek a more personal, direct relationship with God. The Reformation spread rapidly, leading to the formation of new Protestant churches and ultimately reshaping the religious and political landscape of Europe. But Luther's impact went far beyond his theological arguments. He was a prolific writer and translator. He translated the Bible into German, making it accessible to the common people for the first time. His translation was so well crafted that it became the standard German language of the time, helping to unify a nation that had previously been divided by dialects. He also wrote numerous hymns, including "A Mighty Fortress is Our God," which remains a beloved hymn in churches around the world. Luther's personal life was as tumultuous as his public one. He struggled with depression and anxiety, and his battles with the church took a toll on his health. Despite these challenges, he found solace in his family. He married Katharina von Bora, a former nun, and they had 6 children together. Luther's love for his family and his commitment to his faith gave him the strength to continue his work. In the end, Martin Luther's legacy is a complex one. He was a product of his time, shaped by the harsh realities of his childhood and the deep spiritual convictions he held. His actions set in motion a series of events that would change the course of history, leading to the rise of Protestantism and the decline of the Catholic Church's absolute authority. But Luther was also a flawed man, with a temper and a tendency toward extremism. His writings often reflected his darker side, and his views on Jews and other groups were deeply troubling. Despite these flaws, Luther's contributions to the world of religion and culture cannot be overstated. He challenged the status quo, questioned authority, and fought for what he believed was right. His legacy reminds us that change often comes from the most unlikely sources, and that the courage to stand for one's beliefs can have a profound and lasting impact. So, the next time you hear a hymn in church or read from a Bible in your native language, remember Martin Luther. His life was a testament to the power of faith, the importance of questioning, and the enduring legacy of one man's determination to make a difference.